This is an impolite Venus.
Yes, thank God. We need to fight dirty.
It's not a demure Venus.
And it's an attention grabbing, and it's a like bold and courageous.
Yeah.
Is it like, I'm not going to keep the peace, but I'll gather people around something. I should hope everybody that we have elected is out of order, because this moment is out of order. There is nothing legal about what they're doing. This is not a time to be demure. This is not a time to follow the rules that they are breaking. This is a time to do everything we can to be like, oh, you want to create chaos? Great, let's shut it down. Let's have absolute chaos then. Hello and welcome to another episode of Down to Astro. I'm Chani Nicholas.
I'm Thea Anderson.
And I'm Eliza Robertson.
Welcome, 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 y'all. We are recording this on February 5th in the longest year in the history of the world, 2025. We are gathered here today to reflect on what has happened since the last time we talked, which the last time we talked was at the end of 2024, which was, again, about 8 million years ago. A lot has occurred. Everything that has happened has felt like a massive flurry, a torrent of attack. It has been an excruciatingly painful year thus far. The astrology, unfortunately, or fortunately, gives us a context for it. So we're going to talk about one kind of main event, the main event of the end of 2024 and the main event of the beginning of 2025. As we've talked about before, there are so many massive astrological challenges and changes and new beginnings in 2025. So it's both important to zoom out and look at like what the overarching astrology of the year is saying to us. And then it's also, I think, really helpful to zoom in and be really specific. So to reiterate what we've said in a couple of different episodes, what 2025 is it is a game-changing year. It is a year where many new beginnings will occur. It is a year that I think Thea said in our last episode is like a new world order kind of year. And if the first couple of weeks of this year have shown us anything, it's that for sure there are people that are trying to create a new world order in their image, we could say. And it is 1,000% our job as citizens, as community members, to take our role in reshaping the world exceptionally seriously. And that one of the things we need not do is obey in advance, is join fascists in their reimagining of the world, is not to cower in the face of their Wizard of Oz type of projection of themselves as all powerful and as all-knowing, and as this is the way it's going to go because I am the most chaotic and I am the loudest voice in the room. We know that power works in many different ways. Obviously, you can strong arm, you can come in as the one who's going to be the most obliterating in the room, right? We can come in and try to obliterate everything. And then we also know there's 1,000 other types of power. There's quiet power, there's soft power, there's the power of love, there's the power of compassion, there's the power of community, there's the power of collectivism. And it's our job to source our strength every day in the other types of power. And I just wanted to like ground us in the fact that none of us are okay. I think if you're okay right now, then I would love you to go talk to some friends and maybe a therapist. Like there's nowhere to go internally or externally that feels normal, that feels consistent, that feels safe. And that's one of the major signatures of the astrology in this moment, in the opening act of 2025, is that astrologically, there is a sign of feeling insecure, of feeling this major instability. And so we can see that and know that, and also not fear the astrology of it. We can see it as a signal, because the other way that it works is that we are fiercely protective of all that is vulnerable, of all that is in need of protection, and all that is in need of fighting for. And that is where I want us to really ground ourselves as we go into the episode, to ground ourselves in the fact that this is everything on the table is ours to fight for, and everything on the table is ours to protect when in fact it is vulnerable. And, we're taping this on February 5th. I'm not sure if I said that. So by this evening, I'm sure the world will have changed again. But from my vantage point, from our vantage point here, there is an absolute coup going on. Elon Musk has stormed the castle. He is taking over the spending the money of the entire country. It is an aberration. It is illegal for whatever the law is worth at this point. But that's where we are. We are located in a moment where outside interests and oligarchies and oligarchies and billionaires and their best interests are being centered, and they have seized power. And so again, it is our job to be like, no, you can't do that. That is not where we're going. That is not where we're at. And we need to do everything we can to rally every single ounce of energy towards saying absolutely not. And we need to inspire our representatives to also do that by saying, you want my vote? Then you do this. Then you stand up. Then you actually fight back. Then you actually do something that is protecting my rights and my children's rights and my fellows and my neighbors and all of that. So just wanted to say, we are located in one of the most challenging moments, I think, in our lifetime, perhaps. Certainly in mine, it feels like it's the most kind of destabilized the world has been. What we want to focus on right now is Mars. Mars stationed retrograde on December 6th in Leo. But before that, if you remember, during the United States presidential election, Mars was very much in an opposition to Pluto. It was before it stationed retrograde. It was still in Cancer. Pluto was still in Capricorn, but it was also very much in its pre-retrograde shadow. And what we all said here before the election took place is that it looked very much like a steal. I really focused on theft. And then when the election, because Mars, when it's in a dubious position, which we can say in Cancer, it's in the sign of its fall. So it is below, it is not functioning in its kind of like highest octave. So we know that when Mars is in a difficult sign, anything that has to do with conflict, theft, war, aggression, extremism is going to be heightened. And because it was also sitting in an opposition to Pluto, and Pluto is a planet of power and often extremism and control and wealth and the wealthy and how wealth gets distributed and the structures and the power of our economic systems, because it was still in Capricorn. In Capricorn, we could say that. When they're sitting in opposition to each other during an election, that looks like someone isn't playing fair. So I thought that they being the Republicans, they being Trump, they being those powers, were going to try to steal the election. And I thought we were going to be in a legal battle still at this point in the year. That didn't happen. They won, supposedly. They won by a majority, by a popular vote. So what I have been thinking about, among many things, but I just want to introduce this now, is that this is the theft. That the mark of something being stolen at the election time is, I feel like, oh, yes, here it is. And we all knew that this was going to happen, but the kind of force and the quickness and the speed at which they have stormed the castle and are attempting, they have not succeeded. They are attempting to literally steal all of our money and everybody else's. The speed at which has been quite obviously alarming. So Mars is the red planet. It is the alarm bells. It is the warning sign. It is the the troops are coming. Gird your loins. I feel like the original mark of the election, and then when they took power of that Mars-Pluto opposition, is very much being lived out right now.
So Mars was in Cancer when Trump won the election.
Mm-hmm.
And Mars is in Cancer now because it's retrograde back into the sign. And I'm thinking about storming the castle and how that dates back to January 6th, 2021.
Yes.
And Mars was also in a sign where it doesn't do well. It was in Taurus at the time. It had just entered Taurus.
Mm-hmm.
So this almost gives me, as devastating as this is, there's I have a layer of hope as an astrologer that the steal will not be successful. It looks like a flurry of activity. It's deeply chaotic. It's unorganized. If you think of Mars on a battlefield, there's no strategy other than to flood, right? So I know we're going to get into flood the zone and how that really goes to Mars and Cancer, but it's it's the overwhelm. But if you probably peel back the layers, it's chaos, and chaos doesn't sustain, right? It doesn't endure. And so there's, even in the steal moment, I feel like that there's a opportunity for people to be strategic, right? And I like what you said in the opening about quiet power, maybe the power of patience, the power of really approaching something from a level of here's the plan, and how that may take time, but that gives me some sense of hope that we can counter all of the devastation that's going on at this moment.
I just want to parse out one thing that you said. So back in the beginning of November, Mars was in Cancer, making an opposition to Pluto in Capricorn. On January 6th, Mars retrograded back into Cancer.
January 6th this year, just to clarify, because we were just talking about 2020.
Thank you. January 2025, Mars on January 6th retrograded back into Cancer, which just so happened to also be the anniversary of the January 6th, 2021, when Mars moved into Taurus, another sign that it has a difficult time in. So it was this weird, eerie kind of resonance of Mars being retrograde, which is not great, but moving back into a sign where it struggles on during an anniversary of a moment where Mars was very pronounced because it had moved from Aries into Taurus as they were storming the castle. And so since January 6th of 2025, we've been in a Mars retrograde through Cancer.
I know we've talked about Mars and Cancer being challenging, but I don't think we've named why. So Mars is in its fall in Cancer. I think the best way to understand this is in some ways to consider the opposite of one's fall, which would be Mars in Capricorn, the sign that is opposite Cancer. Mars in Capricorn is inherently a bit restrained. All of that Martian impetuousness and courage and hot-headedness, it goes through this funnel of Saturn ruled Capricorn that seems to civilize it in some ways, or at least funnel it to be its most competent, its most strategic. I think Mars in Capricorn knows how to bide its time strategically. Right. It's an earth sign. So in some ways it is constrained by that placement, but in a way that is, I think, subjectively more positive, and in a way that can actually consider long-term consequences and long-term game, which Mars, I think, on its own, the planet of action and war, struggles with. Mars in Cancer is the opposite of that. It doesn't have those constraints. It's in the sign of the moon, which the moon is the fastest moving body in our sky. It's moody. It's kind of emotion at its most volatile and changeable. So this is Mars, which is already a volatile, hot-headed warrior planet in a more volatile sign. It doesn't have that helpful to us earthlings, that helpful restriction. Quite the contrary. It can be, yes, I think I said impetuous, reckless, emotive, just acting on a whim. It feels very childlike to me.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like Trump right now is wandering about the halls of the White House like this, head toddler in chief. And I know that we've like referenced toddlers in the past, but that's really the image that comes to mind to me for this placement. And what I'll say too about just the retrograde, when Mars is retrograde, it is the closest to Earth astronomically. It is the brightest we ever see it in our sky. It's the ruddiest, the reddest, because it's opposite the sun. So this is like the full moon moment for Mars in that it's getting the full reflection of the sun's light, which is why it appears so red in the sky. It is the most glaring. It's like this beating eye staring down at us. And that can mean that all of the martial themes, even if it's not in the sign of its fall, get turned all the way up. They become louder. So we're experiencing both at once right now.
Yes.
Can I pick up what you said about the childlike quality?
Please.
I was going through the text as one does to be like, what is Mars retrograde? What is Mars Cancer? Just the fundamental meaning. And Abu Mushar has a really good description of Mars retrograde first, which he says it's when Mars, when it recedes, it is similar to a son of a fugitive that escapes from his father and then returns relying on his father's affection. So there's, it's like,
That's
it's not even
literal.
it's just not even the fugitive. It's the son of a fugitive.
Right.
And then the second part of what he says about Mars and Cancer is just really emphasizing the humiliation, right? Mars offends very much in its humiliation or in Cancer, since it is a cold and moist sign, while Mars is hot and dry as the nature of the fire. And therefore, when it humiliates itself, its affliction is double, both because it is in its own humiliation and because it's in a sign different from its own nature. So there's someone in the White House who, like, we all know doesn't belong there, who's like a toddler throwing a tantrum.
Or just pushing boundaries too. Like, he definitely tantrums a lot, but he's also like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to tariff. I'm going to throw, this fine at you. I'm going to threaten you with this. And then sees what happens. And then it's like, oh, just kidding. Anyways, on to the next thing.
He can't take the heat. So when when the bishop, I think it was like a day after the inauguration.
That was great.
Yeah. And went on to say, like, listen, like, please have mercy, right? That was so Mars and Cancer. Like, have mercy on people who are about to suffer under your policies. Like, please take them into consideration. And he was like, that was terrible. Like, there's
he
like,
couldn't even look. It was like a toddler. Like,
the child
not even paying attention to you.
Yeah. That's what I definitely picked up on that.
Yeah.
What I mean when I say toddler is it's that the short circuit of I want, it is mine. Like, I deserve to have this, even if it's truly not. Like, this whole other country, mine. It's like we evolve with our brain. Our brain evolves to understand a little more nuance in that. And I feel like his brain just hasn't made it that far, or it's regressed, or I don't know.
One day they'll write many books on it. Okay, so great. I love this. And I also want to throw in two more kind of motifs. Mars is an alarm, right? Mars is like a literal red planet, red flag. And Cancer is a sign that is focused on security and safety, because it is a sign about conception, because it's ruled by the moon. The moon is a planet we look to for literal physical conception of humans, but conception of all things. New moon, new star, all the stuff. And so when Mars is in Cancer, there is a red flag or a siren or an emergency kind of signal, especially retrograde, about issues to do with family, homes, and security, because that is Cancer's main thing. Cancer is like, how do we keep the family safe? We've got little ones, we've got older folks, we need food, we need housing, we need our needs met. Cancer is the waters of the womb, the waters of conception. It is like the ocean that we all come from. You could say, obviously, Pisces is also the ocean, but it's the waters that life begins in and gestates in and comes from. So when something hard is happening in Cancer, we know literal life is going to be threatened. Families, homes, things like homeland security and like tightening up the borders and feeling martial things about who's safe and who's not safe. I've also been thinking a lot. So obviously we can talk about reproductive rights, how they're being attacked. Obviously we can talk about deportation, about ripping families apart, about ICE literally just like everywhere in this country doing unlawful things. We can also talk about homes that were lost in LA because of the devastating fires. So there's just like a list of things. Again, we're only 5 weeks into the year that have already been so devastating and so alarming to the system. And then I've also been thinking a lot about this motif of if Cancer's the waters, right? It's like the waters in the body. There's something about this feeling of being attacked in the waters that are supposed to engender our life. And so I've been thinking about the system attacking itself. I've been thinking about a kind of like a chronic illness that is an autoimmune situation where what's supposed to function for us attacks itself. Mm-hmm. Because when you attack your own people, when you attack the people of your country, when you attack the people that provide millions of dollars and billions of dollars, like all this like wealth, and when they pay taxes and when they are your workforce, and, like anybody that is here that feels, like threatened by citizenship, not having the right kind of citizenship, not having all of that stuff. It's like, it's the system's attacking itself to go in and, have a billionaire stage a coup against everybody's literal social security. It's like the system is attacking itself. The system has obviously made people like Trump and Musk, although Musk is an import from a place that was founded on apartheid. But that kind of, it's like the ways in which they are the government and they're also attacking the government. And I've just been kind of meditating on that feeling of like the calls coming from within the house. Like this is, wait a minute, you're literally attacking everything that keeps the fabric of this country together, but also the fabric of the world, right? Like this is a government that is attacking nations across the world and has recently ceased to give aid to countries that we've always given aid to, a very Cancerian thing. I'm not saying that like the whole aid industrial complex is a good thing. This country has created many devastating situations. We know that, but in order for people to get food and water in ways that they need to, this is the system that we're in. So also that kind of aid and like making sure people have the things that they need. Everything that we're doing is engendering ill will towards us and creating greater insecurity, which again, just feels very thematically on point for Mars retrograding through Cancer.
Yeah, I like it. I like Trump as autoimmune disease and his whole government. That feels
no
very
offense to autoimmune diseases.
I mean, they're very harmful also to humans. But I mean, we see it with the way he's fired or like is pressuring people to leave the civil service. It's literally his mandate. I mean, what did he say? That inflammatory line, the enemy is within. It's literally the language he's speaking. He's not even pretending otherwise. He is, and I know this has been quoted a million times as well, but he literally is attempting to remake America and I think the world in his own image. And I think like I want to come back to what you said before around and what others like Ezra Klein have said. Like, we can't believe him because he knows the power of narrative. He knows the power of recasting a narrative. He is trying to do this with January 6, 2021 by pretending. It's so surreal to be seeing photos of literal people mobbing the White House, of like climbing over walls and attacking other people. And then for that to be recast as a day of love and solidarity and like peace. And then to pardon and release, like what was it, 1,500 people who, anyway, it's surreal. But I think his whole game is like retelling the story in a way that suits his own interests. And we can't let him, like, we have to remember the reality. We can't let him take narrative control over everything, which is his attempt. I mean, he's trying to redraw the boundaries of the entire globe with that same strategy.
As you were talking, I was thinking about like toxicity as well, like something
Poisoning the
dangerous
well.
and poisoning the well. Hello, first waters, the waters that provide for everyone in the community. And also the way that blame works, right? Like scapegoating and blame works is a certain level of toxicity, right? So that if something like totally tragic and devastating happens, like a plane falling out of the sky, then there's blame tossed around on a national level. And how that really creates, by calling the pilot like a DEI pilot, and these sort of things that they actually like, they infect, they infect the discourse.
Mm-hmm.
This whole like Mars and Cancer has also, the flip side of it has shown the way that like, if there is an infection, there's also like people tending to each other and being like, okay, this hurt, but like also we can start to heal or repair it. I like the way it's also too, as you were saying, like the connected to a narrative or recasting the narrative feels also kind of Neptunian at the very, very end of Pisces, being like, the enchantment's almost over, right? Maybe the enchantment of what America is, to go a little bit further out when Neptune goes into Aries on March 30th. It'd be interesting to see like people don't believe him and how that could switch or turn a new switch on in terms of like believing a certain story that people who govern have our best interests. I feel like that's already kind of being chipped away at.
I want to pan out for a second. So Thea's mentioning one of the biggest transits of 2025, which is Neptune leaving Pisces for the first time in like a decade and a half almost, and entering a new sign, entering Aries. So Neptune is a planet of illusion and projection and the image. And in Pisces, it's very dreamy and intoxicating. And Neptune is a planet of intoxication. So whenever it's at play, we know that there's something to be very mindful of in terms of being, being totally deluded into something that is not reality. Because Neptune right now is sitting with the North Node just moved into Pisces on January 11th from Aries back into Pisces because the North Node moves backwards through the signs. Because they're sitting so close together and they will make a conjunction soon, and because Saturn is also in Pisces, there is this heightened moment around Neptune and the North Node in Pisces. And Venus has also just left that sign. So Venus was also connecting to Neptune and connecting to the North Node. And so there was this heightened, I would say one of the downfalls, and one of the things you can also work with is like transfixing people with a spell or with an image or with a barrage, with a flood of something. And imagine seeing a movie for the first time, like a moving image for the first time. Neptune was discovered around the same time as we developed movies and literal moving images. So it's not real, but it looks really real. And you're transfixed by something that is so, it's so vivid, it's so alive, it really connects to your brain in a way that you're like, whoa, what is this? And so I do feel like, I love what you're saying, Thea. I just wanted to kind of parse it out a bit. It's like, I do feel like we have been transfixed by this chaos, which obviously, I mean, it's just like, what else are you going to do? It's so alarming. It's, the Mars and Cancer of it all. It's attacking our everything to do with our security and our way our economy works, Canada's economy works, China's, Mexico's, who else has he attacked in the last, 2 minutes? We haven't even gotten to Gaza. So attacking people's homelands and attacking people's economies and attacking people's well-beings across the globe. But I wonder too that once that big Neptunian influence of being so mesmerizing, especially around the North Node, because the North Node heightens everything and expands everything. Once that does leave, and once by that time, that will be the end of March, we'll be very deep into the Venus retrograde that starts on March 1st. I just feel like March is going to be a very game-changing month, and not to get too ahead of the game, but I want us to know, like, we are in this sluggish Mars retrograde through Cancer, which feels like moving through mud or moving upstream. And it feels like everyone's like stunned in the chaos of it all. And then the Neptune kind of being so lifted up right now. It's like, how do we snap out of the spell? How do we kind of like get back to it? And you can feel right now, again, we're recording this on February 5th, but you can feel like, some politicians starting to come in, starting to push back. And like, I feel a coalition, a coalescence, something else building and brewing since Venus moved into Aries a couple days ago. So I do feel like that is going to bring us some kind of fighting energy, but you can feel this like difficulty moving, coming together, not being so like in awe or overwhelmed by the projection of their delirium.
It feels like the Matrix, when Neo unplugs from the Matrix, that rude awakening, like, oh my God, I've actually just been a cog in the machine and now I have to go eat slop on the spaceship. But this reality is better than being hypnotized by some computer program. Like, it feels like that whole story arc of the rude awakening, but at least it's real. At least it's reality. And in reality, you can anchor yourself. You can marshal your forces a little bit more soundly because it's actually what's happening.
So we've been transfixed, but we've also been muted. And and this is their strategy, and we've alluded to the flood the zone strategy. The other word for it, this is from what I understand, this is Steve Bannon's strategy from a few years ago that they're following to a T. The other word for it that Steve Bannon used was muzzle velocity. Velocity is a very Mars-like word, that the speed of Mars, which is, normally when it's not retrograde and is now going slowly compared, at least from our point of view on Earth. But this idea of muzzling, like the media, and I think all of us are almost rendered speechless because so much that on like any one of these on any given day would be a huge headline. And he's just flooding us, intentionally with so much that is so horrific and so objectionable and so irrational and just bonkers that it's like, we actually don't have the attention span to hold it all. We don't have enough headline space to print it all. And it becomes so easy just to not, like, we're stunned. It's like it's a stun gun. But I also, before we leave Neptune in the North Node, another thing I've been thinking about with that, as those two have come closer together, Neptune is also a planet of release and escape. And I've just been noting, like, over the last couple of months, how many people have been literally released. I think for me, it started, this was before the North Node entered Pisces, but where I started noticing it was in December when the Assad regime fell in Syria, and all of these prisoners who'd been just stuck in those jails for decades and decades, they were freed suddenly. You see it with the ceasefire, with the exchange of hostages. People who have been in prison for the last year and a half have been released. You saw it, unfortunately, with the January 6 insurrectioners who have been released. There are just all of these hordes of people being released from confinement. And so I was seeing that as well as Neptune, a planet of release and escape, draws closer to the amplifying North Node. It just seemed another very literal manifestation of that.
Yeah. And here's probably a good time to note that one of the big things that happened in January was that the nodes changed signs. So again, the North Node went from Aries back into Pisces, and the South Node went from Libra back into Virgo. And that's where they'll be for like the next 18 months-ish. And so as soon as the North Node changed signs from, again, we gotta layer all this together. But from the sign it was in when it was October 7th, when all of that began, it was in Aries, the sign of war and the sign of aggression. And as soon as it went back into Pisces, there was a supposed ceasefire. Now we're recording this the morning after Trump announced that the United States would take over Gaza, and he would follow through with the ethnic cleansing that Israel began 80 years ago, 100 years ago, that began about 100 years ago. And that obviously it's like another one of these statements where it's like, there's no, you can't do that. But there's this next threat to Palestinian livelihood, land, lives, life, culture, all of it. So like everything else, we have to see where we can fight it, how we can fight it. There's no precedent for, besides just colonization, settler colonialism everywhere. But that is also just one of these moments of like, oh, how to create ill will across an entire region is to just say you're going to take over a piece of land and build a lot of waterfront property.
A Riviera.
In the Riviera, yeah. So there was that piece too, where I think we were all exceptionally cautiously optimistic, but that was a stunning kind of moment. And because Trump was involved with it, it didn't seem like it was going to actually be good for the people of Palestine. And here we are with the proof that it isn't. But it did begin this release in that region of Palestinian prisoners that had been held for God knows how long, some of them in Israeli jails.
I think too, what's just disturbing about that is he is like a toddler playing Monopoly and he thinks he can just buy out the world or invade the world. But now we're talking about that instead of actually how do we hold people accountable to the ceasefire? How do we actually imagine a new reality in that region? It is so the opposite of what I imagine presidential is supposed to be. It seems, again, impulsive. It seems ludicrous and deeply, deeply hurtful and damaging. But now Netanyahu just has the green light to do whatever the hell he wants, it seems. It doesn't seem like Trump will be holding him to account. I guess he's already had the green light, but I don't know. It's like flummoxing.
Yeah,
deeply.
The believability, like, I was thinking like, we don't have to believe in this like colonial, white, power hungry male imagination. When you open, Chani, you were talking about Wizard of Oz. Like, we can see it for what it is and also know that it has implications on the real world. But the enchantment period feels like over.
From your lips to all the God's ears, Thea, I don't know. I don't know what the MAGA base feels, like the people that voted him in. I don't know if they're disenchanted. Well, I think when they don't get their checks, when they don't have any kind, like when, they don't have any kind of healthcare, when the doctors, that are supposed to be taking care of them have been all released because there's a fork in the road, as Elon says. Like, maybe then I don't know. I'm cautious to believe that as well.
I feel like they're still under his spell.
Yeah.
Neptune going to Aries will burst a bubble.
This is what I'm saying.
Whose bubble is it, though?
Yes.
Yes, of course. This is like trying to predict an election. Who is this going to benefit? But this is, I think that the enchantment on some level since 2011, right? That's when Neptune was in Pisces. It's like, It ends in a major way. I think there's an opportunity there, but
Yes. It's all opportunity. Okay, let's, with Mars will end its retrograde on February 23rd. That's when Mars stations direct. Now, I just want to say that Mars hangs out at 17 degrees of Cancer for 5 weeks. So if you have any planets like 16, 17, 18, 19 of Cancer or Libra or Capricorn or Aries, you are in a grind for those weeks. It is very, to put it bluntly, like meat grindery. Like, it's, if you have anything there, just know that is going to be a hefty time. You can do a lot of really good personal work when Mars is just on your ass like that, a thorn in your side like that, because it will make everything exceptionally uncomfortable. And we are going to collectively be exceptionally uncomfortable in that moment because Mars just hanging out at a point like that when it stations direct is it's sharp and it drives the message home. So it will station direct on February 23rd. There's not going to be immediate relief, but there will start to be a turning of the tide. It is wild to note that on December 6th, Mars stationed retrograde in Leo. Very different vibe. If you remember the beginning of December, very different sign. It's flashy. It's bold, Leo. It's charismatic. It's alluring. It's attention grabbing. It's charming. It's cute. It's a hot sign. It's a fire sign. What happened in the beginning of December? Luigi Mangione was
oh my gosh,
everywhere.
That was like a year ago.
It was a million years ago. But that's the beginning of the Mars retrograde. What happens on February 21st? He's in a hearing. So the beginning of Mars retrograde, we had him flood our timelines and a conversation about class consciousness, if you can even imagine it, now that the billionaires have taken over, began in a really fascinating way. Mars was sitting in an opposition to Pluto in Aquarius. Pluto is still in Aquarius. Pluto will be in Aquarius until 2040 something. And so the station direct of Mars aligns with a hearing for him. And then Mars will be, so that's just like something to note, that it's a wild bookend of the beginning and the end of the technical piece of Mars retrograde. But Mars will be in Cancer, will remain in Cancer until April 17th. Once it goes back into Leo, which is what will happen on April 17th, that vibe shift will be major, I think. And then it will align with its third and last opposition to Pluto, which will happen at the end of April. And I think that will be massive because that's right around the time that Venus stations direct. It's right around the time that we'll be in that kind of moment too. So I just feel like by the time we get to the end of April, there's been, so much has happened, so much has been turned over, but I think that we're going to get very unstuck at that point, and that there will be another situation that rhymes with what happened in the beginning of December. So hopefully another conversation and something about class consciousness. I'm not wishing ill will or ill health upon anybody, but I am saying that there's like kind of those pieces that are very connected to Mars. We're still very deeply in Mars territory, at least until the end of April. Not saying that there isn't other things that it'll do this year, but within this story we've been in since the election.
And I just want to say too, or add to that Luigi Mangione is himself an incredibly martial figure. He has a Mars-Sun conjunction. He's not an exact Kazemi, but it's within like 2 degrees.
In what sign?
Taurus.
Right. Oh, right.
And he has Venus in Aries, interestingly. And I think the North Node was exactly on his Venus when he shot the CEO, whose name I don't remember. But it is interesting. I mean, absolutely, that whole chronicle, that whole saga has been mapped out perfectly onto this retrograde. But he himself is one of Mars's children.
Yes.
For what it's worth.
As is Trump. Trump has Mars on his ascendant.
Yeah, indeed.
And this is, that, and he is, well, I don't know if we want to get too much back into his chart, but one of the other wild parallels of this year is that Trump has a Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini. The United States, the chart for the United States has Uranus in Gemini. And this year, Uranus is coming back into Gemini, which we talked about in past episodes, aligning with this country going to war, being in a civil war. It is the mark of the birth of this country. A declaration of independence or of chaos. Uranus is a planet of chaos. It's still in Taurus right now, but we know that because this year it's making its first foray into Gemini, and the person that's leading this country, at least as we speak, has that Sun-Uranian conjunction during a total lunar eclipse. His job, his chart says you must be a bringer of chaos. Now, it could be chaos for good, but it's turning out to be chaos for evil. But just to say that's another mark of this kind of year of this moment that a very Uranian figure is ushering us into a year where Uranus changes signs, which is a huge deal in and of itself.
There's so many places we could go with that.
I know. Have I led us too far astray?
It's a whirlwind.
I want to go back one step to say that February 23rd, Mars stations direct. On March 1st, Venus will station retrograde, which either Mars or Venus being retrograde in a year is a hot spot, is like, you know, that something important is going to happen during that time. It just so happens that, you know, Mars is going to pass Venus the retrograde baton, and Venus is going to station retrograde in Aries, Mars's sign, which it did at the same time of year back in 2017. And 2017 was a year of massive eruption from the people, massive protests, massive uprisings, and a massive, like, no, this is not how we want to see it go. We can't judge the success of movements from tiny slices of time. So whatever problems we had with whatever movements occurred at that time, fine. May we learn from them and apply the lessons this time. But I have said this before, and I'm wondering what you both feel. I do feel that as Mars stations direct, even though it's going to hang out at that 17-degree point, and Venus stations retrograde, I do feel that that will be the end of February, beginning of March. That will kind of, and this is a weird thing to say because Venus will be retrograde, but I do feel like that will be the time where people are hot and bothered and ready to go and protest. And I could be totally wrong, but it does seem like a important crossover and collab.
Were you alluding to the pussy hat protesters from 2017?
Well, there's the Women's March. You know, we're not going back to pink hats at all. Everybody's gotten that memo. That's not what we're talking about. But I'm talking about, that was the largest protest in terms of the number of people that showed up in this country's history, I believe. But also, there was protests around the world. There were, you know, Emily's List. There's all those kind of markers of pushing back against the system.
Yeah. And I think my point there is only this movement perhaps rising from Venusian figures.
Yeah.
So Venusian figures being women, being, you know, any femme folks or
anyone whose gender is marginalized under.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And as we know, you know, people with trans identities, their gender has been entirely marginalized by Trump, if not erased.
Attacked. Yeah.
Erased legally, or at least he's attempting. So I can imagine that coinciding with a groundswell of oppositional force, because I do feel like we've been muzzled. I feel like a lot of us have just been, like we've been talking about, kind of almost frozen in place. I'm hearing a lot of people who are just, for their own self-care, like tuning it out. They just don't want to listen to what's going on, or don't want to take it in, because it's an assault. It is an assault on our senses. Just his voice on those sound bites is so grating. I can't stand it anymore. But this to say, I think we have to
get Eliza some relief.
But I think channeling that in an oppositional way feels healthy if we can gather ourselves, gather and direct. But I agree. I think if that's going to happen, that Venus retrograde in Aries, the sign of the warrior, feels apt. This is an impolite Venus.
Yes, thank God. We need to fight dirty.
It's not a demure Venus. It's a fight dirty Venus. And I do think we might need that.
And it's an attention grabbing, and it's a bold and courageous, and I'm going to go. It's against the grain, right? Like a planet in the opposite sign goes of what it's supposed to be in is something that is the outlier, the outsider, having to be contrarian. So contrarian Venus is I'm not going to keep the peace, but I'll gather people around.
What does this look like? Like a filibuster?
Yeah. I mean, if Venus is the planet of justice and of the scales of, keeping everything in balance, I should hope everybody that we have elected is out of order, because this moment is out of order. There is nothing legal about what they're doing. This is not a time to be demure. This is not a time to follow the rules that they are breaking. This is a time to do everything we can to be like, oh, you want to create chaos? Great, let's shut it down. Let's have absolute chaos then, but not for your benefit, to impede your own chaos or the velocity or the speed of your chaos.
Yeah, I mean, because decorum is like when the rules aren't functioning. That's what I was thinking about it on the inauguration, like watching all the past leaders, and it just felt like we're going to do decorum, but that's just insane. Like we're all sitting in the same room. It was so...
Except for Michelle Obama.
And Michelle said, see you later. I have better things to do. That's why I stand Michelle all the time.
I didn't even know that. I love that though.
Oh, Michelle was like, no, I'm busy that day.
Good.
Yeah. I like that. I could see that trajectory happening from, I like the passing of the baton, because I think Venus has it does unions, right? Even just thinking about the last Venus retrograde that we had in a different sign, but in Leo, another fire sign. So when it gets hot, it's going to shut it down. It's going to unionize. It's going to go on strike.
Say when the last Venus in Leo retrograde was. We started this podcast then.
Yeah, we started our podcast during Venus retrograde. So we had that forever. And that was the summer of 2023. It was when all the actor strikes.
SAG-AFTRA went on strike. The entertainment industry shut down.
Yes, all of that. So just, we're not going to perform for you. That could be a little bit online too for this one if Venus is stationing retrograde in a fire sign. In a Mars one, it's a little bit more in your face. The refusal feels also kind of like online too, just because it's going to make those conjunctions to Saturn.
Venus will retrograde back into Pisces and make conjunctions with Saturn as it stations direct and the North Node. So it feels like a no. It definitely feels like a limit.
Mm-hmm.
It's also going to be with Neptune. So Neptune, as we've talked about, goes into Aries March 30th, which is still in the midst of Venus retrograde. But Venus retrograde is going to be grinding over all three of them, Neptune, Saturn, and the North Node. So all that we've been saying around being transfixed, or this muzzle velocity, being dumbfounded, like almost speechless, rendered speechless because of the unconscionable and unimaginable things that are being bandied about and threatened and enacted. I do, like, to your point, Chani, around Venus and Aries being an emblem of protest, or maybe helping us swallow our own refusal and our own protest. It will be talking to each of those points, and it is in Mars's sign, so it's kind of talking to Mars as well.
Yeah.
How those conversations will go, or how that whole movement will go, we'll see. But it feels like it's tying it together.
Yeah. And you reminded me of something that I wanted to say about Mars in Cancer in this moment. And because Mars will be in Cancer until April, we're really in it. I'm not the first person to say this. I'm not the first person to think this, nor will I be the last. When we see violence enacted on the world stage, what comes up for us all is the violence that we have lived through in our families or in our past, the violence that was not obstructed by the adults in the room, or that could not be obstructed by the adults that we had to depend on, the violence that we've lived through structurally, systemically, depending on how we're situated. But the place that we can all go, the work that we can all do at this point, is to understand what this triggers for us, for the smallest, youngest part of us. Because not one of us didn't have to survive some kind of bullying or some kind of patriarchal violence, some kind of system, family or not, that was close in to us, that impacted our well-being and our quality of life, that wasn't rhyming with this one, that wasn't a reflection of this one that we're dealing with now, of somebody who is a tiny little toddler baby having a tantrum, but puffing themselves up to be like, I'm all big and I'm all powerful, and I'm going to wreak havoc on your life, and I'm going to make you feel afraid all the time For a lot of us, that was our fathers, unfortunately, or our brothers, or somebody else in our family. Maybe it was our mothers, maybe it was our sisters, maybe it was somebody else, maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a next door neighbor, maybe it was someone that inflicted great harm on us. But these moments transfix us in part, not totally, because there's very real danger that is afloat. But in part, because we have had to survive it as young people who did not have capacity to understand it or to fight back because we were too young. And so this Mars in Cancer is like, how do I be the fiercest parent to myself, to reparent myself in those ways, to be like, I get it, you're afraid these things happen to you, but I'm an adult now. And I'm in a world with other adults. And this is what we can actually do. Actionable, tangible things, a little at a time, all the time, to reclaim agency and power away from these bullies. Because there's, on one level, again, I'm not saying on every level, but on one level, there's nothing different. This is so familiar to all of us because of all we've had to survive or all we had to see a family member survive, and all the ways in which we were literally rendered powerless because we were too young to do anything. And nobody else interceded when the violence was happening in our families or in our backyards or in our neighborhoods or in our schools, again, or in the systems we live within. And so that piece, that deep emotional work that this moment is calling us to do, so that we can be released to meet the moments that we're going to be meeting. And so that we can unleash the most courageous version of ourselves that we can do now as adults, what we weren't able to do as children.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think that's a really beautiful reminder.
As a way to say, like, this attack can't, not here. Like, absolutely not.
Yeah. And it reminds us how personal it is. Like, this is a reminder of the way in which our pain and the violence that we've been subjected to, or the violence that is surrounding us, is all interconnected, and it's interconnected to this greater violence that is being perpetuated on countries, on regions, on peoples, on nations. But I think it's strange to say, but I think in a way I almost find that a hopeful reminder, because it's calling to mind our shared humanity and just the way that violence can be scaled up, but so can, as you say, like healing or just reckoning with what we've experienced and not letting ourselves be immobilized by it, or not letting ourselves be immobilized in that scared child place, but actually learning to grow beyond that and be grounded as adults, as grownups, when there aren't grownups in the room right now. That's what we're experiencing.
As you were talking, you didn't say internal family systems, but that's what I was thinking about. Yeah. And I think that's what you're saying. There's so much opportunity to really, as Mars is retrograde and as it is astronomically so close to the Earth, it feels like it's here, like it's right internal. And this idea of it's like in the gut, it's like in the body, and it's kind of turning. And so if we can be with whatever that sensation is, I think then that's just like also part of the work. Like, we're not actually launching forward into attack. We're kind of sitting with everything that's kind of brewing.
And it requires us to look at our past when we're doing this like personal work so that we can meet the collective moment. It requires us to look at our past and be like, oh, that was abuse. Like, that was an abuse of power. I can love that person. That person can be, like one of my family members or one of my idols even. And they also abuse their power. And it impacted me in this way that made me feel like I wasn't allowed to do anything, to say anything, to stop anything from happening. And it's the same reaction that I can get stuck in when it happens large scale like this. Do you want to talk about the Grammys?
I do. I want to do it for the culture. Listen.
Let's go.
I just felt, so I was like, it felt a little Mars retrograde coded, or at least a Mars in Cancer, because I was looking at certain people's charts. So first of all, we had Kendrick Lamar. So he won for Song of the Year.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
In a Canadian tuxedo, was it?
In a Canadian, listen, the king The cute little king of just like side jobs, like all day. So Kendrick's chart, he has Mars at 17 Cancer.
No.
Damn.
Yes.
Remember, let's a callback to our earlier point that Mars will
Yes.
just be hanging out. So his Mars return is about to occur.
Exactly. And he's that's Mars is in his 10th, so it's really close to his midheaven. It's conjunct his lot of fortune.
What's the 10th?
The 10th is everything public. It's how people behold you. They can see that part of your chart. It's like your career, your public endeavors. It's on a grand stage. So literally going up to the Grammy stage and receiving like the highest award in your field. I feel like I was like, oh yeah, Mars retrograde, if you have a certain point, like if it's your Mars return, you can do things. And maybe you could do things that are spicy and kind of like throwing jabs at other
An
people.
attack. Get awarded for attacking,
Exactly.
not being the best version of yourself.
Well,
That's a compilation of TikToks that I reposted yesterday, where there was a lot of influencers making jokes saying that, like, look, Kendrick has proven that you don't have to be the best version of yourself. You can be the Mars and Cancer version of yourself and get tons
like
of
a little
awards.
petty.
A little petty.
A little petty and poetic at the same time.
But decimating.
Yeah.
Having an entire room of someone's colleagues reciting the words on cue, verbatim, of your demise.
It was almost, no, you know what I felt? I felt like, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so embarrassed. But I don't want to be embarrassed for Drake, but I felt like, yeah, it was an attack. It was, the whole thing.
It was a celebration of an attack.
Listen. Yeah, so the Kendrick of it all. And then Beyoncé, she's got her Mars in early Leo too. So like at 1 Leo, I think. So that was also like a kind of victory. Now Mars isn't in Leo right now, but it just felt like a part of that retrograde story because she was kind of embattled, right? Like she, as a Black woman, to make a country record, like for many years, the country music industry, by the way, Beyonce, we know she's from Texas. Like she is country. She's like, this is my culture. And I just like this as kind of like the flat, like it doesn't matter. Like I won my Grammy after also 25 years. It just felt like also a really victorious moment for her. And then of course, Doechii also has Mars in Cancer.
Oh my God, really?
She has Mars. Okay, Doechii has Mars at 23 Cancer.
Amazing. So also part of this retrograde.
The album that she won Best Rap Album of the Year is called Alligator Bites Never Heal. Have you ever heard of more Mars in Cancer? Like the whole thing.
It's literally Mars in the swamp.
Yeah, so it's like quite stunning to see all those moments in the culture. And I'd be like, yeah, we are definitely in a Mars retrograde, but it's also like there's moments that are not devastating, that they're just kind of, well, they might be devastating if you're Drake. I'm sorry. But that's, yeah.
And I think Beyonce, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody can correct me if I'm wrong, but part of like Cowboy Carter was birthed from having such a racist, white supremacist reaction to her CMA song with the Dixie Chicks when she was at the CMAs and got literally just like hate from the audience.
Yeah, and then she won for Best Country Album at the Grammys. Hello.
Yeah. It's a nice return.
Yeah.
With
Mars is the victor after all. I mean, even
if
it's currently retrograde in Cancer.
Yeah.
For people who've been dealing with this, with these signatures for their entire lives.
Right.
It's a journey.
And that, her Mars, if it's at 1 degree of Leo, is being opposed by Pluto right now. Mm-hmm. And so it's that kind of something about a transformation or something about the power of her Mars, of her performance. It's in Leo, of her impact on the community, if it is in fact in the 11th house, which we think it is, of the impact on the audience, of her having this once in a lifetime transit of Pluto opposing her Mars. It's like the power of her impact and the power of her fight. And it is a fixed sign Mars, so it's in it. Lifelong.
Yes.
I just wanted to talk about manifest destiny for a second.
Let's go. Easy.
Are we gonna
simple subject. Let's do that at the end of the episode.
I don't have to.
No, go. I'm being serious.
I am just personally concerned for how many times Trump, with increasing sincerity, does not just seem to be joking about wanting to annex Canada, but then hearing him apply that threat with military force, as in threatening military force to Greenland, to Panama, hearing him now imagining Gaza as this like Riviera, a waterfront strip of hotels or whatever he's imagining. Someone made the joke, Gaza Lago, like one of his henchmen or whoever. It's completely disgusting and objectionable. Mars, the planet Mars, they want to colonize Mars as well. It's just, and so I was curious to go back and look at like when the term manifest destiny was seeded. Manifest destiny is this belief from the 19th century that America has this destiny to basically take over the continent, completely displacing the indigenous people who lived there and, pretending that it was uninhabited, that it was their divine right, their divine providence and privilege or what have you. Anyway, that phrase I found was first written by a New York newspaper columnist. I forget his name. I think his last name was O'Sullivan in 1845. What I want to flag here, just because it does really rhyme with this moment, and I think it is a red flag, I think it is a warning. In that moment, Saturn and Neptune were approaching a conjunction in Aquarius. Mm-hmm. So this idea of Saturn being boundaries or borders and Neptune eroding or like imagining the erasure or the porousness between borders. We're in a similar moment now where they're both very close in the sky, and they're going to come to an exact conjunction in 2026. Mm-hmm. But I think it is a red flag. They made their exact conjunction in 1846 as America, the Union of America, was expanding westward, which was again part of the manifest destiny. The newspaper columnist wrote that after annexing Texas. Speaking of Texas, as in Texas was absorbed into the United States, and it does just seem like we're in a time where someone is trying to rekindle that fallacy. And that like incredibly grandiose, just like ludicrous lie that this.
And he keeps referencing that actual time period too, right?
He does. Yeah, he does. And not to mention the fact that tariffs were like last levied after or at least in this kind of extreme way, after the American Civil War. And so I think they were first mounted in 1861, and that there was a whole time period where the tariffs were kind of where the U.S. was exploring very protectionist policies around tariffs and the economy that basically ended in the 1930s with the Great Depression. Just saying, I'm not even saying that tariffs are bad or good, because I also think that there are huge problems with the neoliberal agenda that brought about NAFTA, that brought about free trade.
Yeah.
But
there's a reason why we're here.
There's a reason why we're here.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying, yay, free trade, let's protect that per se, but I just think the throwback to these colonial eras and also to these eras of incredible,
white supremacy. Yeah.
Well, that too. Yeah. White supremacy. We know who his idols are. We know what he thinks is the model for success in terms of America first. And it's dangerous. And we're coming towards another moment where Saturn and Neptune are joining together. That does happen every 35 years or so. So I want to be clear. This isn't like itself. It's not like the last time that happened was in the 1840s, but it's still rhyming with that time.
The last time it happened, the Berlin Wall came down.
Right. Yeah.
So there is, and we could go back, but there's precedence for like some kind of erosion of, and I'm not saying that was a bad thing. I'm not, there is a erosion of boundary that we can expect from, this time, especially this summer.
Yeah. And it just frankly, I mean, it makes me nervous for me. I like my abortion ability. Thank you. I'm not in any way a Canadian nationalist. And it's actually concerning how this is increasing Canadian nationalism. Like the threat of Trump is turning the dial up on the patriotism here.
Yeah.
That's another issue. That's another problem. But it is something I actually feel some concern about now, not to mention just the threat that he's levying against other parts of the world and with military force.
And the irony is that we ended the last episode with me saying like, Eliza, how do you feel as a Canadian talking so much about American politics? And you were like, well, it impacts everybody. But then as the Mars-Pluto opposition of January 2nd took place, he literally was like, yep, I'll use military force to go into Greenland and Panama Canal, and Canada should be the 51st state. And we were like, ugh.
He said that again on the call or after his call with Trudeau yesterday or whatever day that was, Monday. Like he again reiterated, well, I think Canada should become a state. Then we wouldn't have to deal with tariffs. With increasing seriousness. I think it started as a joke. Maybe I think he's still bluffing to some extent. But
this is what he does. He's like, yeah, let's do this. And he sees what sticks. And so it is imperative that Canada be like, absolutely not. We didn't even talk about the fact that around the Mars-Pluto opposition, when he was threatening all of this, that Trudeau dropped out.
Yeah. Yeah. He dropped out on January 6th as well as Mars was entering Cancer.
When Mars went back into Cancer.
That fateful day.
As it was moving from the sign of leadership, Mars and Leo, into Cancer, where everything gets mushy and weird.
Yeah. And what I'll say is these tariffs are on hold for 30 days. Meanwhile, we don't even have Trudeau is still technically prime minister, but it's meant to be in 30 days that we're finding our next leader who will be a sitting duck until the elections that will likely be held in March. But this is a time of, we literally don't have a leader. And the leader of the most powerful nation in the world, arguably, is wanting to annex us. I feel a little vulnerable over here.
A little Mars in Cancer.
A little Mars in Cancer. Not feeling the security.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I will say, I heard this on Sandy and Nora Talk Politics, which is a Canadian podcast, but they reminded me / people that Pierre Trudeau, so Justin Trudeau's father, his daddy, pulled a similar tactic where, and I'm not saying Junior Trudeau is going to go this way, but Pierre Trudeau lost an election to the Conservative. He dropped out. He said, I'm no longer a Liberal leader. He resigned. Then he made a comeback and he ended up getting reelected for another term. That was in the 1979 to 1980 election. So he said, bye, I'm like dropping out. And then he returned. I'm not saying Justin Trudeau will do that.
In the next election, he returned?
Within a year, because there was like the government fell due to the budget. It wasn't passed. But people really liked the speech that Justin Trudeau gave in opposition to Trump. I think they saw him as leader-like.
I was like, oh, there you are. Thanks for showing up.
He rallies in these moments. Poilievre, who will likely be the next prime minister, he's a conservative. His plan for how to oppose Trump, guess what it's called? This isn't at all worrying.
Make Canada great again?
Close. It's called Canada First.
Oh.
So that is it is an echo. It's a clear echo. And he is just waiting to see which way, like, are my supporters or my conservative supporters anti-Trump because they're super patriotic for Canada, or do they actually want to be absorbed into the union? And I think that will decide like which way he goes.
What populist can I?
Yeah. Anyway.
No, it's all very important. Like all of these, and and how the Mexican president has been showing up. Like every single, I think this is what, it's like so important to remember. Every single thing that happens is important because his tactic is just to exhaust everyone and everything by being totally chaotic. And he doesn't want to govern. That was the thesis of Ezra Klein's statement, is that he's not winning. He doesn't want to govern. He's really good at chaos, but he's not good at follow through. So we have to remember, like, all of these cycles that they're just wanting to whip us into. Yes, they're all exceptionally dangerous. And yes, there are exceptionally dangerous things going on, especially in terms of like imprisoning our own population and shipping people off to basically like concentration. All of these things are very, very, very dangerous. And probably 95% of what he puts out and what he says is going to be forgotten about the next day. It's going to be not followed through. It's going to be something he doesn't actually want to do.
They're disorganized.
But he's hired someone. He has hired someone. He's married someone. I'm speaking metaphorically, who does follow through, I think.
Are you talking about Elon?
I am.
Who is also an exceptionally chaotic character.
Exceptionally. And manic. But I think he does follow through.
Probably on drugs.
Probably.
Does he have really good follow through? I mean, with his business.
I mean, he says he does things and he does them. I'm not saying the effects are good, but the way that everything he did at Tesla, everything he did at Twitter, which he now wants to do for the federal government, I think to exceptional chaos and to exceptional damage and harm, but he follows through. It's just, it doesn't lead to order per se.
Yeah.
But what happened to JD Vance? Like, I feel Elon Musk is the vice president at this point.
I think Trump's the vice president.
You're right. That's it. As soon as Trump gets wind of that, he won't be happy about it anymore.
I don't know if he cares. I mean, I don't know. We'll see, because he doesn't want to work. Mars is going over his Saturn, and Saturn is ruling Trump's year. So we'll see. We'll see what that brings us.
Should we do the Ask Me Anything?
Yeah, we should.
Yes. Ask me anything. Except for how we'll exactly survive all this.
This is the question. Will Pluto in Aquarius help us fix/save the world, aka genocide, climate change, government?
I think a good thing to start off with is I think all three of us don't believe that planets will do something. I at least believe that the astrology shows us a reflection of the quality of the time that we're living through and the possibilities for that. So Pluto in Aquarius isn't going to do anything for us, but because it is a planetary transit that of all signifies the official end of the United States' Pluto return, and that a Pluto return is about 248 years, and most empires only last about 250 years if you look back at a lot of the empires and how long they lasted. So certainly the empire of the United States has gone through its Pluto return, and this is where it's landed us, which I think we can all agree is nowhere good and does definitely feel like the destruction, the falling apart of whatever semblance of democracy we had, and we have to rally to see if we can fight that. And because we know that the last time Pluto was in Aquarius, we had the Haitian Revolution, the French Revolution, and of course the American Revolution, that this is a time where the concentration of wealth and the masses of people that are suffering under that concentration of wealth or power or both come into some sort of conflict or some sort of fight or some sort of revolution. So that is what we can say the next couple decades definitely seem to be looking at that disparity or highlighting that disparity. And our job is to meet that moment and say, what kind of revolution do we have access to? Do we do? What is the next iteration of a people power movement?
That's perfect. I mean, I really agree with everything you just said. Planets don't do things for us, but I like the invitation of like knowing what's online based on what's happened in the past. And if we're thinking about the US and a certain that the Pluto return for this country ended, and now we're stepping into something instead of maybe land and banks and all the sort of Capricorn significations, we were thrust into the era of air. So air is kind of like it's up here, it's dispersed, it's about data, it's about anything that's going to hover above. And I think that it also invites us to kind of step into like, what is the new, it's an air sign ruled by Saturn. So what is the new framework that we can contemplate? We can have a new ideology. We can have a new way of doing things. What is our utopia, not utopia, right? The thing that's like the castle in the sky that doesn't exist yet. And Pluto wants to see, or Pluto, the planet of the underworld and power and agency and resources, is like, how do we, power to the people, right? How do we like then build a new framework for what power looks like? And one of the practical things I've been thinking about is just, and I've said this before on this podcast, is just like that the power is like right here. Like it's not out there. We know it's certainly not in that building called the White House. So like where does it reside? And it resides in like our conversations, our community, the collective, all these other sort of Aquarian things. So I think there's, it doesn't guarantee anything, but there's like an invitation to connect with others and to start to build something that does feel new. Because it's happened before.
You alluded to at the beginning, Chani, that Thea alluded to in the last episode, it does feel like a new world order. I think Pluto and Aquarius, Pluto's the slowest moving planet. It's going to be here for 2 decades. It does feel like a new chapter is being seeded. And I really love what both of you are saying, and it makes me think. So I showed some of you this off stage. I'm going to stand up. The shirt I'm wearing says Octavia Butler tried to tell us. I've been reading Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, and just everything. So first of all, shout out to my friend Sandra, who bought me this shirt, who gave me this shirt. But so much of what Octavia was writing about in, I think, the 90s, or maybe even late 80s, it is eerily prescient, and just so much maps down to the election, down to the slogan, Make America Great Again. It just maps onto what we're witnessing now. But one thing that feels relevant here that I want to allude to is in the cult / organization / utopian society, alternative society that one of the characters is devising, called Earthseed, the term for the teacher / reverend figure is called shaper. And it just calls to mind what you said, Chani, about how we each have to shape the reality that we want us to grow into, that we each have a role to play in shaping how we guide this ship, and to claim back that narrative, and to not let one bully, one toddler in chief set the rules or set the terms. So like, I think that Pluto and Aquarius, in terms of, it's not a blank slate, but I do think it's an opportunity to rewrite the narrative, to help shape at least our own contributions and the way that we want to guide our own work, and then also the way we can come together and use that force in a collective manner. So yes, I think calling us all on shapers of our destiny is where my mind goes to as well.
That, and beware the robots.
Beware the robots.
The last time we also had it was part of the Industrial Revolution. It's Pluto and Aquarius, so we know we're well in the Industrial Revolution of it all, and we can link Aquarius to tech and robots and such. So there's that piece of it. I do want to just circle back to one thing that is Octavia centric, is that the LA fires, the absolute devastation that they've wrought, which we can want to think globally, connect back to the genocide and the mass of bombs dropped on Gazan civilians, and the impact not only on our fellow people and relatives, and the just inhumane act of that, but also the environmental impact of war and genocide. And then it circles back to this drought that happens in LA, the massive winds that come, and the fires that happen. In those fires in Altadena, a historic Black community, a community that a lot of folks that have been kept out of the housing market were able to buy homes and build community for generations. The gravesite that houses Octavia Butler caught on fire. And so she literally wrote about fires in LA, I believe in 2025. And then her place of burial acts like this alarm bell, is this kind of point, this lightning rod of, hi, I literally wrote this for you. Here you are. So a good reminder to read that if you can handle the truth that comes with it. And also maybe like, I don't know, some kind of book club support group of sorts. Of course, Adrienne May Brown and many activists for a long time have done a ton of work based on her work. So please go follow them and find also like other thinkers and academics that have been parsing out her incredible literary contributions, and just sending massive love to all of our friends and community in LA and the surrounding areas. And that devastation is just untold, environmentally, psychologically, emotionally, economically for folks. It is a whole other layer of this year and the Cancerian themes of home and place and where we're safe. And we certainly know a lot of people that lost homes and schools and their neighborhood. And it's one of those, moments that just was another shock in terms of how to situate ourselves in anything that feels safe or normal and secure and stable, which we know we're not in because we are in climate catastrophe, and we know that there is no such thing anymore. So the urgency to root with each other and to find home in one another is find political homes, find mutual aid homes, bring your neighbors cookies, find ways to connect with people that you wouldn't normally, I think is really imperative. All right, y'all.
We knew this one was going to be intense.
We knew it was going to be. Yeah, it's hard. It's really rough out here. So we're sending you a ton of love. We're in it with you. And we will do anything as a podcast, as a company, to help stoke the fires of resistance and of community and of mutual aid that we can. And we just really appreciate all of you tuning in and listening and working through this with us. And we're going to be back next month with a focus on March and the upcoming Venus retrograde, the upcoming eclipse cycle, the first eclipse in Virgo, the last eclipse in Aries, the Mercury stationing retrograde as the eclipse it rules in Virgo happens. And then, of course, the massive movement of Neptune from Pisces into Aries. So March is one of the most eventful months of the year because so many things happen. And the Venus retrograde, a change of a very slow moving planet, and eclipse season, and a Mercury retrograde all together. So we'll be back to help ourselves, each other, and all of you hopefully find some tools and find some ways to parse out how everything is occurring. All right. Until then, bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.